disappointing, forgetful. These are just some of the terms that have been used to describe the latest entry in Fox's X-Men franchise, Dark Phoenix. In this video, I want to discuss why the film doesn't necessarily deserve all the scrutiny it has garnered since its release a few months back. After the disappointing results of X-Men Apocalypse, the studio decided to head in a new direction, stripping the next film back from the big action set pieces that the series had become known for, opting for a more intimate and personal approach. The problem with that, though, was that they were once again adapting the Dark Phoenix storyline, which they had already done back in 2005 with X-Men The Last Stand. While The Last Stand does have a few bright spots, the Dark Phoenix component of the film is arguably the weakest part of the film. The Last Stand was written by Simon Kinberg, and with Dark Phoenix, not only is he back to write the film, but also direct it, which could be viewed as one of Fox's biggest mistakes, seeing as this was his directorial debut, and it clearly showed. Now, I don't hate this film. In fact, I quite enjoy it. In my opinion, it's a little underrated, but it's not without its flaws. One huge flaw was the runtime. Clocking in under 2 hours, there is just simply not enough time given to develop the storyline and the characters. For example, I wish there was more time given to show how the Dark Phoenix power was affecting Jean, which could have really developed her character a lot more. I thought the film started off really well, ended off strong, but the middle portion of the movie was a bit more slow paced. Had there been more scenes added to further develop the characters, it may have helped the film out, as a lot of them weren't given much screen time in X-Men Apocalypse, so we didn't really care too much about them at this point. The villains in the movie, the Dabari, weren't given much of a background story in terms of their exact motivation in the film. They came off quite lifeless and bland, and their character designs leaves much to be desired. The lack of Quicksilver was quite disappointing, as he was part of some of the most memorable scenes in the last two X-Men movies. There were also some quite cringy moments too. The scene between Raven and Professor X after the space mission sequence is where we have the infamous X-Woman line. This film really butchered Raven's character, as in the prior films, she was striving to get others to accept their gifts and appearance, especially in First Class. Mutant and proud, am I right? But even the X-Woman line can't even compare to the horrendous F-bomb that was given by Cyclops right before the New York fight sequence when Professor X and Magneto were talking. It's edited really poorly, and I suppose they were trying to make him come off as a badass, but it was quite laughable and atrocious. Those aside, there are some very good moments in the film. I quite enjoyed the scene towards the beginning of the film when Professor was talking to young Jean Grey and used the pen as an analogy for her mutant gift, in which it would be in her hands whether she would use that gift for good or evil. It was quite simple but effective in my opinion. This space mission sequence was really enjoyable to watch. I quite liked the nod to the original X-Men film with the extra coming out of the basketball court. Nice touch. Here we get a great sequence with Nightcrawler and Quicksilver saving the astronauts, but what really made the scene was a phenomenal score. The entire film had a great score which was composed by Hans Zimmer. For those who are fans of film scores, I would definitely recommend checking out the score for this film. He also released a second collection of music that wasn't used in the film, which is just as great. I like the idea of trying to portray Professor X as being too focused on protecting the image of the mutants, and in turn, losing sight of why he initially started the X-Men. This was an interesting take on his character, but it just wasn't really fleshed out, and the execution was a bit underdeveloped. After Jean kills Raven, there was a great scene between Hank and Professor X. Nicholas Hoult was phenomenal in this scene, as you could really see the emotion that he was portraying. Heading into the third and final act of the film, this is where I believe some of the best scenes in the entire X-Men franchise occur. The New York standoff was quite well done and enjoyable, and it served as a precursor of what was to come. After everyone is captured by the MCU, wink wink, we get into what is the best part of the entire film, the train sequence. According to reports online, the third act was part of the massive reshoot that the film went under, as the final act originally was too similar to Captain Marvel's ending, and therefore was changed. While we might not ever see what the original ending was, I'm very glad we got this change sequence, as this is one of the best in the entirety of the franchise. When the Dabari arrive and the mutants are released, we get phenomenal action sequences where everyone gets a moment to shine. But those who really stood out to me were Nightcrawler and Magneto. With Nightcrawler, we had the soldier who told him how his son used to be a fan of his. Later on, he gets killed by one of the Dabari, which unleashes Nightcrawler's rage, and we get a glimpse of the Nightcrawler that we all know and love. While this doesn't match the opening Nightcrawler sequence in X2, X-Men United, it was great to watch him embrace his powers. Magneto was just straight badass here. When he crumbled the train and just let it go and walked off, such an awesome moment. His standoff with Vuk was great as well, and we got a great shot of him standing with all the guns shooting at Vuk. Again, this video wasn't meant to dissect the film and talk about every positive and negative of it. After rewatching the film, I wanted to share my opinions on it, and in hopes, open the minds of others to not write off the film entirely. With all the negativity and controversy surrounding the film, I feel like a lot of people just didn't give it a chance. It's not perfect by any means, but it's also not the disaster that I feel like a lot of people are writing it off as. I find it more enjoyable than movies like X-Men Origins Wolverine, and even its predecessor X-Men Apocalypse. I quite like the more intimate approach of the film, as it was a nice change of pace from the big blockbusters of other comic book movies that we have been seeing from Marvel and DC. While I am excited to see how Kevin Feige and Marvel will use the X-Men characters in the MCU in years to come, I am a bit saddened to see Fox's X-Men universe end. While they did give us turds like X-Men Origins Wolverine, they did give us some of the best comic book movies of all time. Movies like Logan and X-Men Days of Future Past. While not always being perfect in their execution, I commend Fox for the risks that they took, as they played a major role in starting this comic book craze that we are in now. It's unfortunate that the series ends off on such a disappointing note. Anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed the video. This has been NihilistFlicks. Until next time.